Energy healing is the process of focusing attention concisely in order to produce a specific effect on the environment. First, we want to go down into the source or the seed of the imbalance and focus attention there. And that's what this healing webinar is all about, right? Because the seeds of karma are kind of at the source of imbalances, symptoms, problems that crop up at the surface. So that's the idea. We want to cut to the chase. We want to get down into the core of the concern and then put our attention there in the most intelligent way in order to create an effect that's going to eliminate pressures on the surface, that's going to uplift the quality of life and success in all areas at the material level of creation. Uprooting the seeds of karma. I know pretty much everybody in this group has a pretty fairly clear idea of what karma is. I think mostly everybody, but I need to define just a few characteristics of karma in order to help lay out the landscape of the seeds of karma so that we know how to focus our attention in the most concise and intelligent manner. Okay, so karma can be, in a word, described as action. Essentially, every action, every thought, every word we speak emanates from our being, and it goes out and it touches whatever's closest, right? It touches the close things in the environment, and then it reflects back, and then it continues moving out into the larger environment, and then reflects back from there, and so forth. Particularly, we know that sound waves propagate ad infinitum, and the finer and more abstract waves of action are, the more effortlessly they propagate through the creation. And this is important because there's an old saying that for the intellect, for the human intellect, karma is unfathomable. I believe the source of that comes from the reality that the human thought process, the human mind, can only entertain one thought at a time. So due to the ability to only be able to think one thought at a time, it may actually be impossible for us as humans to completely understand karma. But that's okay. That doesn't have to stop us from trying. We still have to try. And the reason is that our reality is formed in such a way that if we don't understand karma, if we can't deal with karma, then we're in trouble. So we sort of are in a paradox, a bit of a dilemma here, that because of the human mind's inability to think more than one thought at a time, even if we can think quickly, but it's still one at a time, we can't fully understand karma. And yet we have to understand karma in order to raise ourselves out of suffering. So we just have to keep trying. And so that's that's what we're doing tonight. We're going to dive in a deeper than usual way into the whole field of karma and understanding it. I've got a model for you, for everybody tonight to look at. Then it should allow us to get our attention in, even if we can't fully, completely understand every last little detailed ramification of karma. It should still allow us to use our attention to affect the karma which is causing problems and then eliminate it. So that's the bad karma, to eliminate. Oh, and also another word about it is there are three types, according to Vedic understanding, Vedic science, three types of karma. There's good karma, bad karma, and neutral karma. So different types of actions. And karma is also nested, right? So we can have cellular karma, or you can have whole person karma, or you can have family karma, community karmas, religious karma, religions or groups, social groups, world karma, even karma in our solar system, galactic karma, universal karma, different layers like that. All right. So part of the trick is determining, based on the symptom at the surface, where the seed of that is. So the first thing we want to do is support everyone's ability to connect from the symptom, whatever the symptom is on the surface, to determine what type of karma are we looking at. Now, of course, if the symptom is uncomfortable, we don't have to guess. We're probably looking at negative karma. But the interesting thing about this is that I want to go into the healing, but I have to say something else first. Okay, and that is that the past is a lesser state of evolution. So at every moment, if we're producing impulses of our intelligence and our action that are going out into the relative, when these actions start reflecting back to us from locations in the relative, always they will reflect back a lesser state of self. So what it means is, in the present moment, we're always looking at karmic impulses, which are not reflective of our full potential in this moment, or certainly not our full potential in the future. I think this is very important. I'm looking at it. It's important to understand, because this is one of the first things that trips up the ancestors. So it looks like we are going into a bit of a healing here. There are beliefs which are clearing. Looks like they're clearing from the Ajna chakra, the throat chakra, and the heart chakra areas. And whenever we get into the heart chakra, it seems like it always wants to spread out and take up the whole heart mahamarma. So we could probably say head and chest, but I'm actually seeing it isolated in the cord of light, which is kind of running and connecting those parts. And that is a belief. It's clearing. It's a belief that's clearing. That what I'm having to face is because this is not only who I am now, but who I will be in the future. It's like a prediction of trouble to come. And so this karma is this thread, these beliefs. The beliefs are like a thread. I'd like to say also, this is very important for today's navigation through the constructs of karma, is that anytime we do or say anything or think anything, that impulse of expression essentially takes a form like a thread. It opens up out into the creation. It spirals out into the creation like that. It's important to know that we're basically dealing with threads. Karma in its most essential form is particularly very difficult karmas, very heavy karmas, are usually conglomerations of threads, like knots. Sometimes I refer to them as karmic knots. And the threads can contain, they can have as their foundation or their seed, can be like a belief, can be behind that thread. Like if there's that belief that whatever I'm facing at any given moment is a reflection of not only who I am now, but is indicating what is going to terrible things that are going to happen in the future, then that belief acts like a magnet, right? It's like a kind of a thread in itself. It's coming down to us through the ancestral lines, and it acts like a magnet that catches up other threads around it and can start to create knots of discord. So that's clearing. Those beliefs are clearing from this heart center and up into the cord of light. I would say that all the threads are actually sacred. They're all forms of life. They're all consciousness. And they actually, even though they function according to laws of nature, as do we, they're also much less constrained by the relative field of creation than we are in our physical forms. And they have a sentience about them. look, they last for so long, right? They're ancient. If I say, hey, the hey goes out into creation and it doesn't stop. It doesn't stop. So like millions of years from now, my hay is going to be out there bouncing off of stars and stuff. So, so it's like, it's a thing. It's like older than I am. I produced from this physiology, but it has life force in it, has being in it. And as it expands and bounces off of all the forms in creation, it grows, becomes an integral part of the web of creation. And the whole web of creation, the whole web of life is alive. So we can think of ourselves as producers or originators of these threads. All right. We need to be able to figure out, this is what I was thinking just now, what we need to be able to identify when there's a symptom on the surface. How do we figure out whether the thread, like just a minute ago I said, oh, that's a thread that came from the ancestors. But it's really important for all of us to be able to do that. We need to be able to find the symptom on the surface and then be able to figure out, well, is that from the ancestors, or is my own behavior somewhere in the past, or is it something that's coming from the collective karma, or what? I'm just taking a read on how I do it, because for this instrument, it happens very quickly. I would say the reading is done here. This is the center of understanding. So it's not something that takes, it's not an intellectual discriminative process that takes place in the brain. And so it's not necessarily done on the foundation of one thought at a time. It's done from the feeling center, from the understanding center of the physiology. And what happens is the symptom, whatever it is, has its gross, we could say most manifest or dense level of expression. And then it has subtler levels of expression. And then at the finest, at the causal level, right before the absolute, there's an energy signature. And energy signatures are highly specified. For example, this lovely place, I don't know where this is. It's just a picture that I found, but it's so beautiful, right? This lovely place, it has a feel to it. And the feel to this place is very, very different than the feel to my front porch. It's everything has a feel. It has an energy signature. So what we're doing is we're looking for those energy signatures. We follow because it's all at the astral level, everything is threads. Everything is streams or filaments of consciousness. You can follow the symptom, which is at the surface, back into the feel of it. And as we go into the feel, there's a difference between the feeling of something that is very, very small, like a cell, right? Has a different feel to it than a whole human body, which is actually very small compared to the whole universe, right? And when we think of the cosmos, there's a very distinctive feel to cosmic space, to outer space. It has a feel to it. You know, everybody, for those of you who remember the days of Star Trek, one of the reasons that TV show was so fascinating was because the whole show had as its foundation the feel of space. The feel of space permeated every line of every script and every piece of every set and every costume and so forth. Even if it wasn't 100% accurate, the feeling was right. The feeling was good. It was almost, we could say, downloaded to Gene Roddenberry. So that's why it was so attractive. And it still is. There's still people that enjoy that show. Nerds. Anyway, yeah. So I love you guys. So there's a feel. There's a feel that goes along with every experience that's that comes in through the senses of perception. And the feel has in it a code that associates or connects with very specific energies. And one of them I've just talked about, from very, very small, like if it's a cellular imbalance up to, you know, say a collective imbalance, a world imbalance. The other forms, such as understanding the beliefs that are behind those energy signatures, part of it comes from inference. So I do use inference, and I think I've talked about that more in the past. Right now, though, I'm feeling into our collective, and I know that we've got people in the collective that are uncomfortable. We've got folks that are feeling uneasy, and so we want to get into really dissolving those seeds of karma. So the reason it can be difficult to pick apart the details of the, once we've determined, like, oh, well, this is like personal karma because I had this, you know, experience in the past where I wasn't kind or something, or maybe it was a war situation which was horrific and I was driven to do things that I wouldn't normally do, and so forth. Once we get into the knot of the karma, the first thing that I've started to notice is that the more intense the karma is, the more tightly the threads are bound together. The more tightly you bind anything together, the more orderly it becomes. So the bigger stresses, the bigger karmas are more difficult to pull apart because the threads have become bound together in an orderly fashion, and it makes them more stable. The other thing is that in any karmic knot, there can be threads, like there could be a thread from something that you did 1,000,000 years ago, and something that you just did yesterday, and something, there could be a thread that's coming from a family karma, and there could be something that's having to do with solar system karma or something like that. So when you get knots like that, they can be very complex, and it can be difficult to read. So what I do is I go in and I pull one thread at a time. It's like grabbing the low-hanging fruit, right? You pull the thread that's the easiest to pull out. So if you can start to unknit, you can start to pick out a single thread, then that will help to loosen the tightness of the knot. There's another thing. Every knot of karma originally forms around a single mother thread, a single first thread, you could say, the first thread that comes in. And that's the one that acts like a magnet that pulls the other threads in. So normally, if you just have one thread of karma, that usually isn't going to cause a lot of terrible physical symptoms on the surface. Normally, if you're dealing with something horrific, you're probably looking at a knot of karma. The other thing about the knots of karma, so this is just me describing their basic structure, right? The other thing about the knots of karma is once you start getting threads wrapped around each other like that, they will tend to attract on the outside something like a shell of discordant feelings. Because when there's a knot that's giving rise to symptoms which are uncomfortable, naturally, and the knot is like kind of almost unfathomable, right? So many different influences of different types. And there can be hopelessness is often one of the first discordant feelings that will gather around a knot like that. Hopelessness, and then, of course, fear, because if something like that is sitting in the physiology, and usually it'll be sitting down at like an astral or even causal level. These knots can sit down at these deep levels. So layers of discordant feelings form around the outside of the knot. And if the individual, if we try to get in, what happens is the first thing we have to deal with are the discordant feelings. And they can be like off-putting. They can be off-putting. And so this setup, this arrangement, protects the knot of karma until such time that the energies are sufficiently built up, that the consciousness is sufficiently built up, that it can go in and start extracting those threads. The beauty of our beautiful group is that we have the benefit of all our consciousness together. So if there's a knot that's too much for any one of us to deal with, as a collective, we can do this. And we can work on all the knots at the same time. Because as we start working together, as our collective starts functioning in a more and more coherent fashion, we can transcend a lot of the boundaries that are naturally found at the denser levels of creation. Like the idea that, well, okay, maybe as a collective we could work on one knot of stress. No, we can work on all the knots of stress. For example, in fact, we can work better on all of them at once, because if there's a mother thread in the center of the knot of karma, then every mother thread will have, maybe that's not the best word, the seed thread, the source of all the threads, the first thread. There's a first thread. All the first threads will have a certain energy signature in common, right? Because being the first one, put it out there, and that somehow it had those specific laws of nature that it attracted other threads around it. So what we need to do is identify the energy signature of the first thread. All right, that shouldn't be too hard, right? Everybody knows what it's like to be first. That's easy. First has its place, and it's easy to identify. It's a little bit harder to discriminate, like the 97th from the 98th. Like that would be a harder discriminating process, right? But first is super easy. So what we're going to do is we're going to look, I'm just going to settle my awareness to look into the field of our collective. And we're going to look at all the knots of karma. We can look at all of them at the same time, because consciousness is infinite and unbounded. So we could even look at all the knots of karma in the whole creation at the same time. Well, that would be something. But let's just start with our collective. We can start at least here. And anybody you love, or anything that's really important to you. And we're going to look for first threads. And what I'm seeing is all the threads are anchored to infinity at their ends. Think of it like a necklace, right? There's the thread of the necklace, there's the knot of karma, right? And then there's the clasp. And the clasp gives us infinity at both. It turns the necklace into a loop. So first threads. The initiation thread in the knots of karma. And what I'm feeling around these first threads is a little bit of a kind of Rajasic energy and a Tamasic energy. So there's a little bit of like agitation in them. They all seem to have some agitation in them. They also have this potential to create some trouble. Potential to create some trouble. So the energy that creates trouble, when we're talking about the relative level of creation, physical bodies and so forth, is that which breaks down. It breaks down the relative. And one of the beautiful insights that was gifted me over the last couple of weeks since I last saw all you guys was that we know that the energy of creation responsible for the breaking down side of the divine dialogue is associated in Vedic terms with the god Shiva. Shiva brings everything back to silence. It breaks down the relative and brings everything back to the field of pure knowledge. And the reason, I found out recently, the reason that Shiva is given that responsibility is because Shiva is the most compassionate. It was a very sweet realization. because the breaking down process is so tender and it can be so difficult that if it isn't performed with utmost compassion, then the suffering would be far worse than it actually is. And it doesn't matter if you want to give it a name. It doesn't matter, maybe, a Hindu name doesn't suit you or something, it's fine. Think of all these forms as forms of our consciousness, everybody's consciousness. So compassion is inherent. Compassion and wisdom are inherent in the breaking down process. The problem, okay, I'm seeing where we need to focus our healing attention. The problem rises when you've got the breaking down process going on, but the concept or the ability to perceive the compassion and the wisdom is dampened. And the ability to perceive the pain of the experience of the breaking down is dominating. And that is an imbalance. That is an imbalance. It is absolutely possible. It is absolutely possible to bring balance into this aspect of creation where the relative breaks down in such a way that awareness or senses of perception can fathom the wisdom and the compassion as a more dominant, as more of a dominating aspect of the experience than the discomfort. All right. Offering that concept into the source of creation. Holding silence. And so I'm again seeing those first threads with their kind of aggravated energy in them. And so what's happening is in the first threads is bringing a lively awareness of compassion and wisdom. We could say that the causal body is humming or resonating with compassion and wisdom. So it's kind of setting like a foundational vibrational frequency for these first threads. But I'm very happy to share with you a realization about how the causal body does that, which just came up today, and it really is going to help tie this into our physiologies. Because as I said, I know we've got people here who are very uncomfortable tonight. So it happens that the physical body has energies, intelligences in it, responsible for the healing process, right? Sometimes I call them Davic energies, these forms of intelligence that heal, that knit bones back together and that reduce inflammation and so forth. However, there's an overarching intelligence for all that Davic energy. And the word that I use to describe it is body elemental. So we can think of it as like kind of a big Davic form that sits over top of all the little worker bees that are inside the body healing. And the body elemental also has a cord of light. But the body elemental is a very, very subtle aspect of our physiologies. So our bodies have a cord of light, and most people's cords of light are about that big. That's my perception. Of course, there are always variations, and some people flute out, and some are truncated, and it's all different. But the body elemental has a cord of light. It's like a large form around us that's big. It's like a shaft. It's like a shaft of light. It's like a sacred space in which our bodies reside. And when the causal body, when the causal field produces a resonation of, in this case, compassion and wisdom, the instrument, the resonating space is this shaft of light. It is this great cord. It's like a great cosmic cord, because the body elemental, that level of our physiology and that level of our body's intelligence is much older, and it's much longer lasting. It's closer to eternity than the physical fleshy body. The body elemental has its own flow of evolution. And it's really very, very integrated with the physical body. So when compassion and wisdom are resonating in the shaft, which is this giant cord that's big like this, like of my body, right? Like this. It's like a big kind of around my body. Then this actually promotes a healing for the body elemental. And what I'm seeing for everybody, all of us in our group, and many other people who aren't here in real time with us tonight, is that the dedication to the spiritual path and the time spent expanding consciousness and refining perception upgrades the physiology in such a way that the original body elementals that we were born with are not necessarily appropriate for our condition now. The body elemental also needs a sort of upgrade, a support and an upgrade. And so this work that's happening right now of the causal body producing this flow of compassion and wisdom, which then is going in and it's integrating mostly in the heart center area, is allowing for an increased ability to identify the compassion and the wisdom that's in any symptom or any difficult situation, number one, so that every time difficulties are arising or anytime you feel pain, that what you're primarily focusing on is the compassion and wisdom that's behind that experience. But it's also healing the body elemental.